Well, again, good morning. Nice to see everybody here this morning. So I know that you're all here because you saw the title was An Economy of Speech. But don't think for one moment that there will be few words said up here. You guys know me. We'll be lucky to get out of here by 4. I'm only kidding. Although the topic today is on the third step of the Noble Eightfold Path, wise speech, otherwise known as Samavakaya, it's actually more about the edge of my practice, how I am working with mindfulness, and how the insights unfold through working with and practicing mindfulness. The founder of Temple Buddhist Center, Ben Worth, who's also my teacher, used to tell me all the time that a spiritual teacher can only take their students as far as they themselves have gone. So we're all going to Gardner, Kansas today. So. Cool. When I was in Japan, I remember the sensei of calligraphy. I got to visit a couple different places, and one of the places we went was a calligraphy studio or session. And the sensei there, we had a long discussion with it. It was really quite fascinating. And one of the things he said is that a mindful sensei can tell your mind state based on how you draw the letters. So by simply watching you, they can tell a lot about you and about specifically the state of mind that you are in at the time. In the same way, our speech reveals much about our practice. It is very powerful conditioning. Over the years, the experiences you've had, the relationships you have been through, have conditioned patterns of speech and behavior. And it can be a very, very powerful conditioning, but it is also a very powerful path of purification. So let me start with 2 stories. These are things that have happened to me within the last month, so they are current and recent. The first one was breakfast with my teacher one morning at a little place called the Bluebird Cafe. And we were having breakfast, and I noticed that there was some coffee on the table. And then there was more, and there was more, and I realized that my teacher's teacup was leaking. And so I said something to him. And he goes, "Oh, okay, well." And then I started to, hail the waiter, or the waiter, the waitress, and he said, "Stop. I'm a big boy, Victor. I can handle my own situations, okay?" And I'm like, "Oh, of course, right." He said, he went on further because he knows me after 18 years of working with one teacher. He knows me very, very well. And he says, "As I talk with the waitress, Victor, I don't want you to say anything." I have this conditioned habit of blurting out. And so I'm like, "Of course, you're right, absolutely." So he calls the waitress over and he says, "Miss, my teacup has a crack in it." And then I blurt out, "Yeah, and it's leaking coffee all over the table." And Ben, he was like, "Did we not just have this discussion?" And I was like, "Oh no." So that's story number 1. We'll come back to that, okay? Story number 2, there's a new little restaurant up here on the corner next to Jerusalem Bakery called Shawarma. And so I went into Shawarma and ordered some food, and I just made light conversation with the clerk, and I said, "Hey, you guys are new, how are things going?" He says, "Well, things are going really pretty well, to be honest with you, but it's been difficult to find help." And then I launched into this diatribe about students at UMKC and what a wonderful pool of opportunity that might be for him to find kids who could use a part-time job. Sounds good, right? That's story number 2. So what struck me the most, and why the edge of my practice right now, is mindfulness of speech, samavakaya, is because those things were totally automatic. I saw the cliff, I just couldn't stop the car and just drove right off of it. I was totally watching myself do this. It's like, I believe it was the Apostle Paul that wrote, I do not understand this form. It does not do what I want and does what I hate. This was completely automatic, completely mindless. And it really piqued my curiosity. I'm like, wow. So let's unpack those 2 stories just for a second. In the first story about the teacup, my first inclination was to fix, repair, control. That's a core issue that comes deep. Deep, deep, deep. Manifests as speech. So first, there was this inclination to control the situation by hailing the waitress, have them come over and let her know what's going on. My teacher said, don't need your help. Didn't ask for your help. Rightfully so. And then, when he held up his cup and said, Miss, there's a crack in this, there was an uncomfortableness within me that felt that the whole situation could have been handled more diplomatically, more tactfully, so as not to offend the waitress. And then out comes this fixing. Oh yeah, and there's coffee leaking out all over the table because there was something within me that was a little bit uncomfortable. I felt maybe he could have handled it a different way, a better way. That's where we get into trouble, is when we think we know something. That's where we get into trouble, when we are asleep and the powers that be, which are operating underneath, are at work and fuel patterns of speech and behavior. Let's unpack the second. So I go into the shawarma and we have this little conversation, and he says, yeah, but help's kind of hard to find. He didn't ask me for help. He didn't ask me, what do you think I should do about it? I just began volunteering unsolicited advice because, boy, do I know how to fix this problem. In fact, let's just go through everybody's problems and I'll fix them all for you. Now, this isn't good, bad, right, or wrong. This is awareness. This is mindfulness. Becoming aware of what's going on. It's not about judging the interaction, nor is it about judging the words. It's about insight. It's about seeing the wizard behind the curtain. It's about seeing what's operating under the radar. As my teacher would put it, shining the light of awareness in those deep, dark corners that we sometimes don't want to look at. I have developed, through conditioning, a bit of a control freak pattern. I have developed, through conditioning, the need to try to fix and repair for people. Why? So that they'll love me, so that they won't leave me. This was learned as a little boy when mom was an alcoholic and dad was gone. You develop these conditioned patterns. It's not a sad story, it's simply conditioning. Everyone has a story. Everyone has had trauma, crises, issues, problems. And so conditioning happens. And with a playful curiosity, we take a look at that. Well, where did that come from? Why did I say that? Why did this form do that? And as we open ourselves up to insight and to mindfulness, once it is seen, it can be purified. awareness unties every knot we have. It's when they operate underneath the radar, behind the curtain, underground, that they control our speech and our behavior. So as I have been watching this, number one, it's been fascinating. So with the playful curiosity, I approach this and I go deeper and I look deeper. Why did I say that? What's going on there? All these old people-pleasing behaviors. All these behaviors around discomfort. So when mom and dad would argue, it was very uncomfortable for the little boy, for the young man. And so therefore, around any kind of conflict, an uneasiness comes up. How do I deal with it? I blather something. I blurt out. I try to control the situation with speech. Get everyone's attention. I know what to do. This is handled. Just follow me. And that feels comfortable, feels safe, but it's a delusion. That's not mine to do. As my high school kids used to say, not my circus, not my monkeys. People need to have their situations and their suffering and their issues because they're on a path too. But the second I think I know their path, I'm deluded and I'm not present, nor am I mindful. I'm operating out of automatic mindlessness. In his discourses on speech, the Buddha lays it out for us very clearly. We are to refrain from, number one, false speech. Now, the obvious in that, of course, is lying. But let's look at the not so obvious, the subtle embellishments. It wasn't, for example, if you're embellishing some little thing like, I got there at, 1:45, just with plenty of time to relax and rest, when actually you got there 5 minutes for just some little embellishment, some small, tiny exaggeration to make the story more than it is. Underneath that is a feeling that this is not enough. What I'm saying is not enough, which comes from a feeling of not being enough. Number two, refrain from abusive speech. Any comment that is not kind, not gentle, not affectionate or compassionate is abusive speech. Most of us in here would probably say, well, I really don't try to ever say mean things or be abusive. But think back just this week, if you had any discussions about politics or about sports, was there abusive speech there? If someone is irritating you, abusive speech. Number three, the practitioner shall refrain from divisive speech. Oh, and this is a tricky little one here. Complaining. Complaining is usually about someone. And if you're complaining about someone to someone else, you're dividing. Now flip it. What if someone's complaining to you about someone else? And you're like, oh yeah, that was terrible. They're a horrible person. You poor thing. You don't deserve that. That's still divisive. Instead of being present, feeling what they're feeling, they're expressing the first noble truth. Life is suffering. Life is dukkha. They're expressing their pain. Let them know, yeah, I feel that. I'm really sorry that happened to you. But we join in and we rally the troops. We marshal the armies against this person who drank all the coffee or didn't close the lid on the toilet. Divisive speech. And the fourth of the discourses on speech, idle chatter. Idle chatter is the interesting one for me, most of all, right now anyway. Idle chatter contains discussions of the past, the future, fixing, repairing, babbling out of an uneasiness or a discomfort. If we can become aware and mindful of our chatter or our abusive speech, that is a pathway to purification and a door to awakening. The teaching about wise speech assumes imperfection. Our mistakes are a vital part of our learning. We need to lie, to exaggerate, to embellish, to use harsh and aggressive speech, to speak at inappropriate times, to engage in useless banter. Because then we can experience how using speech in these ways creates tension in the body. Hello, mindfulness. Because when we do those things, we can experience how that kind of unskillful speech creates agitation in the mind. Hello, mindfulness. And by using unskillful speech, we get to experience how it degrades personal relationships and diminishes the possibility of peace in our world. If we are mindful, we can become aware of the agitation in the mind. We can become aware of the discomfort in the body. So here's how this is manifesting for me in my practice now. As I engage with other folks on just a day-to-day basis, doing things, going places, looking at stuff, there is what needs to be said, and then there's the extra. And the extra has a feeling quality to it. I've been noticing that. So there's what needs to be said, and then if there's some uneasiness or if there is a need to impress this person because just being present isn't enough, which is a feeling inside and it's old tapes, there's that extra, and the extra has a feeling quality that is subtly and very slightly different than speaking what simply needs to be said. But if I'm in a hurry, if my mind is agitated, there will be no mindfulness. I will just blurt and say things, blah, 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 and little cliches and things come out. But if I can be present and mindful, I can feel and sense that extra. And so my practice has been in engaging with people to try to employ an economy of speech. Saying only what needs to be said, and then pausing and see if I can feel, and it comes up every time, there's this welling up of, oh, you should add this, or you need to add this. Need, want, add, as if there was something wrong with saying just what needs to be said, as if there was something wrong with this moment just like it is. If there was an uneasiness, a discomfort, if something was said that felt unskillful, I can always say, I'm sorry, or I can take it to the cushion and contemplate it. So when we feel this agitation or this tension in the body, this is when mindfulness steps into the room like a new shiny sheriff, and you can be aware of those tensions, become aware of those agitations. This is the practice of mindfulness. Not spending all your time judging the things you just said, not spending all your time thinking about how they're feeling about what you were saying. Come back to the body. The body will never lie to you, and the head always will. Come back to the body. What did that feel like? If there was an agitation, good. That means there's room for practice. That means there's time for contemplation on the cushion. That means there is a root underground that's ready to be harvested. This purification, this shining the light of awareness into the dark places that fuel our speech and behavior patterns, this mindfulness practice can be cultivated. The cause of mindfulness is mindfulness. In other words, nothing happens without an intention. Can you set a moment-by-moment intention to be aware, to be mindful? When you reach out to touch someone, what's your intention? When you say something to someone, what is your intention? Intentions can be unconscious or conscious. The invitation in this teaching, this lesson, is to make your intentions conscious. And that takes mindfulness. Inclining the mind towards mindfulness, making mindfulness a top priority. Returning to mindfulness as often as possible, whether you have a little rubber band or you're just trying to be mindful or you have a little Post-it note on the dashboard. Whatever little tricks and playful things that you can do to bring mindfulness and make it a bigger part of your life are all appropriate and well met. So I'd like to close with the old Chinese proverb, mind your thoughts, for they become your words. Mind your words, for they become your actions. Mind your actions, for they become your habits. Mind your habits, because they become your character, and your character becomes your destiny.